All right, fantastic. So let me just click record and then I'll get started with the introductions. All right, so good morning to everybody. My name is Tatiana Calderon. I'm the Autism Initiative Coordinator here at Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center. So just a few words about Synergia. Synergia is a multi-service agency located in Manhattan that has supported New Yorkers with disabilities and their families for more than 40 years. We offer a rich source of information and training tailored to parents, including parents whose primary language is not English or who they themselves have special training needs. We help them participate more effectively in their children's education and development, and we partner with professionals and policymakers to improve outcomes for all children with disabilities. Synergia, Spanish for synergy, and is one of New York City's 3 federally funded parent centers committed to serving people with disabilities and their families, and with an added focus on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. Synergia creates innovative programs ranging from transitional housing for homeless families who have children with disabilities, community residences for adults with developmental disabilities, parenting classes for adult parents with intellectual disabilities, and parenting and education advocacy training for parents of children with disabilities. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. We're absolutely happy that you can be here with us. So welcome to Synergia. Before we get to it, I just want to share a little bit information about our presenters today. So today we have Miss Judy Wolf, who has been involved in early intervention since its inception in 1992, working with New York City as well as other counties in New York State. As a licensed social worker, Judy has worked as a program administrator, service coordinator, and group provider. Judy is involved in several organizations that advocate for city and state policies to meet early intervention programs, mission to provide comprehensive quality evaluations to determine eligibility for services and to provide high quality services that meet the needs of all eligible children and their families. Today as well, we have Ms. Lillian Rivera, who has been involved in New York City early intervention since its very beginning in 1992. Lillian has worked in various New York City providing agencies as well as in Puerto Rico as an administrator, service coordinator, supervisor, as well as the evaluation coordinator. Lillian's background in early childhood education allowed her to also work as a preschool education teacher for a period of 3 years. Her background has allowed her to assist families to have access to quality services for their children with developmental delays, as well as to train new service coordinators achieve the same goal. Lillian is currently close to completing her MBA with a background in Homeland Security to further assist children in need. So welcome to Synergia, ladies. I'm so happy you guys could join us today. I'm sure we have plenty of questions. We will be having a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And if you're joining us via Facebook Live, you can have put your questions in the comments section. Just an important note, we are broadcasting this to a public platform. So if you have any private information, please refer from sharing any personal details, again, as we're broadcasting on a public platform. So take it away, ladies. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Judy Wolf, and you've been introduced to me and to my colleague Lillian. We're really happy to speak to you about early intervention and to answer any questions that you have about this program, which is really a wonderful program. For we who've been involved since the beginning, we've watched how it's grown and how many families have taken advantage of it, and we want everyone to be aware of the program, whether you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. Everybody seems to know somebody who might benefit from an early intervention program. I'll just start with general statements about development, that children, of course, all develop at varying rates, and milestones develop across a range of ages. And we don't want to say your child should speak 5 words at this age or 10 words at that age, or every child is different. And variations also occur because of cultural or family practices. Some parents really require their children to be more independent than others, more language. Every family has its own customs, traditions, backgrounds. And I've always looked at each family is actually its own culture, in addition to being part of a greater community culture. Lillian, do you have anything to add to this slide?
No, I'll add as you go along.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So what we always tell our families to do is to watch children, observe them. There are reference developmental checklists. We will get these, Tatiana, so she can get them to you for anybody who's interested. We have a link to the CDC developmental checklist, which are helpful as long as, again, we remember that every child develops in his or her own way. And again, based on the family. But watch your child. Sometimes I have a cousin who called me and said, my daughter, I know there's something with my grandson. She's not listening to me. Can you talk to her? She called me out of her concern because her daughter just was her first child and she didn't see some of the nuances. And on the other hand, there are people who have a neighbor who they say, oh, this child is speaking so much. And my child who's a month older isn't speaking at all. And again, that could be an individual developmental issue. So grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody should observe a child and cautiously think about if there is some reason to have a concern. And of course, if you are concerned, that's a good reason to take the next step in early intervention, because that early intervention is a process that is not invasive. It's not a surgery or a test in the sense of any physical, discomfort to a child. It's all the evaluations, which we'll speak about, are play-based and fun. So no, it's if you have a concern, it is worth mentioning it.
Mm-hmm.
So early intervention program is easy. You call 311 or you can speak to your pediatrician to make a referral to early intervention. Early intervention is available at no cost to any family in New York State. They will be always asking for some insurance information for you to have, and an insurance company will be required based on the policy to pay for certain parts of early intervention. It never accounts for any part of your annual or lifetime policy deductibles. You pay nothing. You would pay nothing. And again, it doesn't go against any of your lifetime benefits or annual benefits. It's a separate, it's kind of kept in a separate place within the early intervention program. Families, if they call 311 or have a referral made, will be assigned an initial service coordinator. And that is where Lillian, as our service coordinator supervisor for our organization, comes in to help facilitate the entire process. And Lillian, do you want to share a little bit about how that?
Sure. In my role, I do receive all of the referrals, whether it's from parents referring other parents, whether it's through collaborations that we have with hospitals or individual pediatricians. And as soon as we get a referral, I enter it, and once it comes back to us, then my role is to assign a service coordinator. In this case, the initial service coordinator who walks the family through the entire process. And is very instrumental in making sure that the child goes through a very smooth process. Evidently, we need the collaboration from the families in order for that to occur. So communication with the service coordinator is key in having this process be a smooth one.
Okay. I flipped by mistake to the multidisciplinary evaluation, but that is the first After one meets the service coordinator, the initial service coordinator will discuss the process, as Lillian said, and a family gets to decide if they want to continue. And the next step would be getting a multidisciplinary evaluation. And a multidisciplinary evaluation means that there's more than one evaluation that's going to look at all areas of development. There are 5 areas of development that we talk about. There is the communication area, which includes all language, whether, receptive, what a child understands, and expressive, how a child can express his or her thoughts and needs, as well as, listen to the way a child speaks. There's motor that looks at fine motor and gross motor. So the way a child can do some hand coordination, the way a child walks. So all of that is included within a motor evaluation, within the motor component of the developmental areas. There is an adaptive component, and that looks at how a child sleeps, how a child can eat, some of the daily life activities that a child has, and how the child gets along in that area. There's the social emotional component, how a child bonds with other family, friend members, babysitters, whoever the child's involved with, how a child who's involved in any group is in a group, and any kind of challenges in that area. And there is the cognitive, where one looks at how the child understands concepts that a child would understand, depending on the age of the child, of course. So the multidisciplinary evaluation usually is conducted by one generalist, typically a special educator who actually is very familiar with the development of children from birth through age 3, and looks at all of those 5 areas. Whoops, I didn't even mean to touch that screen. Sorry. All those 5 areas of development. And then there's a specialist who would be evaluating with the area of concern that a parent might bring, like when the parent says, I'm really concerned about my child not walking, or not standing, or not crawling, depending on the age. And then we would say, let's have a developmental specialist, and then also have a physical therapist come in to look at the child's gross motor development. Now, the physical therapist might come in and say, I'm also concerned with the child's fine motor development, their ability to grasp an object. So that developmental evaluator might also recommend the addition of an occupational therapy evaluation. And these are the areas of the different types of evaluations. Again, every child will get a developmental. Sometimes it's done by a psychologist if there is a concern that the child might have a diagnosis of autism that's showing characteristics. There might be a recommendation, depending on the age of the child, to have a psychologist actually provide that developmental evaluation instead of a special educator. And then there's the speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Part of the evaluation process is for the family to assess the family's the family's challenges that they might have, any specific family needs, and sometimes there is a nutrition eval if there's a concern about the child's eating, which sometimes is a question of maybe a physical inability to eat, which a speech therapist might pick up. Or sometimes there's a behavioral reason that a child's just not eating, and the developmental evaluator might pick that up. Lillian, is there something you'd like to add? I'm not looking at your face, so.
Well, this is, the process is obviously time sensitive. So we have 30 days to complete the evaluation process from the moment that the child is assigned a service coordinator. And obviously, Judy went into all the domains. In order for the child to qualify for the early intervention services, obviously they do a standardized test, each evaluator. They also do a lot of clinical observations and a lot of parent reporting. In order to find a child eligible for early intervention services, Judy just flipped the next slide. The child has to present a 32% delay in one of the areas of the development, or a 25% delay or more in two of the areas of development. Or if there's a diagnosis already, a pre-existing diagnosis that the child has, that may qualify the child for eligibility and automatic eligibility for the services. Such as if there's a hearing loss, if there's Down syndrome, I'll give you some examples. So those will be pre-existing conditions that child will automatically become eligible for services. We still have to conduct the evaluations because we have to obviously provide reports to the city, but it will be an automatic eligibility for some of these children.
I'll add a couple of things. One is that there is they use best efforts to find an evaluator who can communicate, in the language of the family's language, their dominant language, which in some languages is a little more difficult than others, right? If there's sometimes a dialect that is difficult to find an evaluator, and then they would look for somebody to help translate, because it's really important to, as Lillian said, to involve the family and what the family sees and observes in this evaluation process. And also one nuance of early intervention evaluations as compared to evaluations that you might be aware of from in the school district situation when the child is older, is that they're doing these tests. They do standardized test all the evaluators, that is required, but there's also a professional observation and professional input. And an example might be, does a child walk? And that might be something that somebody's looking at, the physical therapist. Well, there's walking and the quality of the movement. So the physical therapist would be able to say that they would believe a child is eligible based on a poor quality movement, not only that the child passes the test or doesn't. So that professional input into the determination of eligibility is critical in early intervention, and is a difference between early intervention and other programs for older children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If I would just add something, Judy, I think, it's also important to point out that one of the things that we stress to the families is that, obviously schedule the evaluations during the most optimal time, right? When the child is up, it's alert, and, have had their meals, get the better results, but also, keeping in mind that these are strangers to the babies, and they may have some skills that they may not necessarily show during an evaluation. Hence why parent reporting is so important, and it's key when they're doing the evaluations and they're coming up with these percentages of play. So go ahead.
I'm going to let you discuss the IFSP
meeting.
Okay. Yeah, just because you go to so many more than I do. So you can share much more of the details about it.
IFSP stands for Individualized Family Service Plan. After the evaluations are completed, parents receive copies of the reports. The pediatrician may also, if the parent consents, will receive copies of the reports. The family will receive a phone call from one of the evaluation team members to go over the findings and answer any questions the families may have or concerns about the evaluation results. After which, we have 15 days after the 30 days to schedule this IFSP meeting with the city, during which time the family is present. So is an evaluation representative, as well as the city official. The combination of everyone as part of this meeting is to come up with the individual plan for the child. It's individualized to the child's needs, and so we create a plan with outcomes and objectives for this particular baby based on the needs that he or she is presenting. At which time the city official will approve any services that the child will need, such as special instruction or speech, OTPT. The service coordinator's role during this meeting is to document everything in each area of the plan and to ensure that the family receives a copy of the plan. As we mentioned before, the service coordinator up to this point is the initial service coordinator. After this meeting, the family has the right to either request a different service coordinator or remain with the same service coordinator that has been helping them up to this point. 99% of the time, the family wants to remain with the same service coordinator because they've already built a rapport. And then the role of the service coordinator then becomes ongoing, which means the service coordinator then monitors services, make sure that those services have been put in place, that they have started, that the family is pleased with the providers who are assigned to work with them. And we'll continue to monitor those services to 6 months, at which point the plan is then renewed. So this IFSP plan is approved for a period of 6 months at a time.
Thank you. I want to add one thing about the idea of the IFSP, individual family service plan. And that means that the plan is individualized for each family. Services, so the parent has to want the services. It's possible that the evaluator recommends services and the EIOD, the early intervention official from the city, says this is excellent, and the family says, no, I can't manage that. I don't want that much service. Or I would like some more, taking into their account their schedules and their lives. So that's where it's individualized for the family. Some families will want the services at home when there is somebody at home, whether it be the parent or a grandparent or aunt or uncle or a babysitter. Other families might say that they want their child to get these services at a daycare center, a Head Start, wherever the child is. Early intervention does prefer for a child to be getting services in the child's natural environment where there can be a lot of follow through, which we'll speak about in a few moments. But the natural environment where what happens on an everyday basis would occur, and the family and the therapist and the family can work together on those issues. There are also center-based group developmental services for children who have many needs, and where the belief of the family and the early intervention official is that it might be preferable because the child has many needs and based on the family's availability for the child to go to a program where the child gets these services or some or partial services at the program where there would be a special educator. Sometimes they're one-to-one teaching assistants that work with the special educator in the classroom. Often there's 6 or 8 up to 10 children in these groups. The settings for the groups often have occupational therapists, speech therapists, sometimes physical therapists, and those services can be provided within the session that's going on. And for some families, that is really an advantage. Busing is provided if that is something that everybody agrees with, the family wants. Some families don't really want to put their 2-year-old on the bus, but other families do or need to. And there's just differences in how each family, again, individualized program. So I wanted to share that part of the family service plan. I mean, there are guidelines that the early intervention officials follow based on the needs of the child, but again, it is individualized for the family. The service coordinator also, as Lillian said, monitors monitors how the child is doing, how the providers are doing, and might, if maybe a provider says, the occupational therapist might say, I think the child never had a speech evaluation, or the child wasn't eligible for speech, but it's been 6 months. I think the child, maybe now we should look at that again. We should get another speech eval. So that goes through the service coordinator. So it's an ongoing monitoring of current services and any needs for additional services that are recognized, because as a child develops, especially if you start a child very young in early intervention who's under a year old, there are parts of development that you don't really see quite clearly yet. And as the child gets older, you realize that there may be additional needs that can be added into the IFSP. And there'd be another meeting. As Lillian said, the IFSP is written for 6 months. So every 6 months, there's the opportunity to actually change the IFSP depending on how a child's doing. It's possible the child developed the need for speech services, but no longer really needs the physical therapist. The physical therapy goals have been met, so the IFSP can be revised at 6 months. Okay. Lillian mentioned that one of the things is discussed at these meetings are the functional outcomes. What will guide the work that the early interventional team will focus on in working with the child and the family? And I'll add any daycare, a teacher, a daycare provider, if that's where the child is getting services. And perhaps, there may be a speech therapist who goes once a week to the daycare center and once a week to the home so that they can collaborate that way. There are short-term objectives to get to those functional outcomes. So let's say the parent says, I want my child to walk. Well, we first have to have, depending on where the child's at, right, crawling, then standing, then ability to really balance oneself before walking. So those are the short-term objectives to reach the functional outcome. That was the long-term goal. They try to write a functional outcome that's reasonable for the first 6 months. But if a parent says, it's really important for my child to be walking, it just based on the safety of my home, well, they might want to put that as a functional outcome. But again, they have to work towards those objectives to get there.
Yeah, it's a very parent-friendly plan that's developed. And also stressing what we call embedded coaching, which is obviously we come up with this plan and therapists begin to work with the families, but the idea is to teach the families some of these techniques and exercises so they continue to do them throughout the day with the child, right? Because these services are approved perhaps twice a week for 30 minutes or once a week for an hour. But then it's imperative that the parents or the caregivers are also taught some of these practices so that they can continue to do and implement them throughout the day with the child, right? Because the whole point of the program is that the repetition, consistency is how we can achieve these functional outcomes.
And here's some example of functional outcomes. It's not that easy to read on the screen, but it's the child. What will the child do? For how long? How often? And when will we practice? When will we review it? So the child will be able to sit at mealtime for 5 minutes. And when will we do this routine activity? All 3 meals of the day. Why? So that the child can be the child can be a part of the family who has dinner together every night, and any specific condition. So that's really how they look at, it's very much based on, as Lillian said, what's going on in the family and about what the child can do and why the family wants the child to do it, to do this, to have this specific activity that to help with the development and to reach the IFSP goals. So the goals are, we have these goals, but here's how we get to them. And here's some examples that we've come up with. I didn't even, I don't think I remembered that when I used eating in the high chair as an example. As I haven't looked at the PowerPoint for a while, but yeah, so you can enjoy dinner with the family, wants to be able to sit in the high chair. We can't expect the child who's never stays in the high chair to sit for an hour in the high chair. That would not be a reasonable outcome, but to just be a part, and maybe the objective is 5 minutes and then a little bit later, 10 minutes. That the child will crawl around the home so that she'll be able to get her toys. That's a great outcome. And then part of the question might be, well, what's the best way where do we place the toys so the child can get them? What's a child's motor capacity to crawl, and also to grasp the toy, to grab it and to play with it. Learning language, so that a child can ask what the child wants. I mean, one of the things that I neglected to mention during the evaluation time, this kind of fits into this, is that a lot of evaluators, knowing that, as Lillian said, the IFSP could take some time to have a meeting and then to implement it, the evaluators would give some hints to a parent. So if the parent says, my child gets really frustrated and can't speak, and I don't know what the child wants, and sometimes it turns out that my child just wanted water. So one of the things that the speech therapist might do is say, why don't you cut out some pictures of what your water cup would look like, what the child's water bottle would look like, or cup, and put it on the refrigerator at a level where the child could reach it and point to it. And then you could pair it with the word water, cup, thirsty, whatever word you might want to use for that. And the child would then be able to go to the refrigerator, point to that, and that would take away some of the frustration that the child's feeling, that you're feeling. So that can sometimes happen even before the therapist comes into the home, because the evaluator made that suggestion. And that this last functional outcome reminded me of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Lillian mentioned embedded coaching, and what the therapists are trained to do is to look at what the goals, what's mentioned in the evaluation, what are the goals of the family, and to work to design an intervention that fits with the family's routines, that makes sense to the family, that can fit into what happens every day. So we want the parents or the caregiver, to whatever extent possible, to be involved in what goes on during a therapy session. So it's really important that occurs. So if there's a parent who says, my real struggle is that I have my 2-year-old, I can't get my 2-year-old out of the house to pick up my 4-year-old from the school bus. Okay, that's something to work on. And that might involve getting some motor, putting on socks and shoes. It might involve some physical therapy of walking downstairs and opening doors, things like that the therapist looks at all of the goals across all of the domains, but understands what the parent needs, so that the lives could improve for the parent, the child, and the whole family. So the therapist might say, okay, great, let's go to the bus stop together. Let's figure out what we need to do and start working on what can be done to facilitate what is needed. And the therapists are trained also to coach the families in the best way that the families learn. Like some people would like, for something complicated, would like to have something modeled. Some people like to be given verbal instructions and then to do them. Other people like to learn through watching and then copying. However, everybody learns. Some people learn best both. Parents have different kinds of learning styles, just like children do. So, that the therapist will work with the family to say, well, let's see how do we get this child to get his or her shoes on, so that we can then, next step would be going out the door, or getting a jacket on so we can go to the school bus. Parents are never allowed, or caregivers are never allowed to leave the home if the services are taking place in the home. They have to be there in the home. And so one of the going out saying, I'm leaving you with the child and I'm going to go to the bus stop alone is just not an option. It's not allowed in early intervention. It's against the regulation. So that parent would have to, or the caregiver or whoever's going to go to the bus on Tuesday, well, this is Monday and they have to learn, because on Tuesday, the therapist isn't going to be there. So on Monday, it's important that they start working on how they can, both the caregiver and the child who's getting early intervention can get out of the door to go to the bus stop. Because as Lillian said, the therapists are not there all the time. And it's important to practice and coach and to see what works. Sometimes the provider will come up with an idea and the parent says, no, that's not going to work for me or for my family. I don't speak that way. I don't act that way. So they have to revise the type of the way the activity would go. The session notes that the early intervention providers do actually include a section where they talk to the family member or the caregiver, the school or the daycare center about what happened since the last time I was here, and we talked about trying this activity and this strategy to get the child to reach a certain point. And that's they discuss it. And if the parent says it didn't work because, they say, well, let's revise it. And if the parent said, this is great, this worked, now we can move on to the next step, that becomes the next activity that is agreed upon to provide in the next session or sessions, so that they have the strategies. And
I just wanted to add something here. Real quick,
of course.
As we mentioned earlier, implementing the plan in the most natural environment for the child may also include things like, weather permitting, going out to the park if it's physical therapy, right? And using the equipment in the parks, or grocery shopping or things like that. Anything that will facilitate for the families to also implement these activities during their daily routine is key, whether it's inside the home or whether it is going out into the community. Just because you want to integrate the child, right, not just in the home, but also in your daily routine activities, such as, like we said, transitioning from getting your shoes, putting your shoes on and actually leaving the house and going out into the community, where parents can then learn how to best manage, right, some of these struggles that they may face, like, let's say, for example, when they go out to the supermarket and the child begins to tantrum because they want something or anything like that. You have an interventionist during these activities that can help navigate some of these nuances and troubles that families may be facing when they go out of the house.
I am going to pause for a moment. Lillian, interestingly enough, has to go to a meeting with a family that could not be rescheduled because this was the time that it was convenient for the family. And she's going to have to leave this presentation probably around 11:25, 11:20. I'm not sure exactly when, Lillian. But
11:15.
Okay, so anybody that has any questions for Lillian, this is, I want to make sure that if people have specific questions for Lillian, that they could ask them now before we proceed on this discussion.
I don't see any questions yet, but I'll definitely check our Facebook, and we don't have any comments there. So okay. We're free to proceed. We will proceed. Okay. There was something I was just thinking of that I wanted to add to what Lillian just said, and it blocked my mind. Okay, we will probably come back to it if I think of it. One other option that began during the pandemic that actually is still available to families is teletherapy. And for some families, it is
a good alternative for some sessions or all sessions, depending on the family situation, health members, the health of members. If there's an elderly person who has some immunocompromised condition in the family, and with like right now with many of these infections and COVID and RSV and the flu on the rise, families don't want somebody in their home who is also, again, these therapists are going often from one home to another, and they don't want that person in their home. So there is the option of doing teletherapy. It works better for some families or some children than others. Certainly, when there is some families, one of the services that was mentioned in the list of services is a social work service, which is sometimes for the child and really as much for the family. And that can take place, under teletherapy. The parent can talk to a social worker or a psychologist, maybe even depending on the schedules of everybody's schedules, it could even be at a more convenient time than the therapist might be coming to the home. And so teletherapy is an option. It remains an option that really has worked for some families. Not for every family, again. And what the challenge was often for a very young child, especially a child on the spectrum who really couldn't focus for long enough, on a screen. Some of the providers we did a lot of training during the course of the pandemic, and some providers took a lot of other courses as well and became very proficient at how to build a therapy service for a family with a parent or caregiver who really had the availability of time. And that, of course, is because the child's not going to be on the screen alone. A child between the ages of 0, obviously, and 3 is just not going to be able to maintain that screen time alone. But often the therapist comes up with some ideas and some suggestions of toys or different kinds of different types of equipment that the family has, whether it be a couch to use to stand up on, or sorting laundry in a laundry basket right in front of the screen so the child can learn colors and shapes and some language. This is mom's, this is dad's, this is my sister's, this is my brother's. They've learned to take activities and actually work for an hour on the screen at a time. So I wanted to always say that is an option for people for families when they don't want somebody to come into the home, and it remains an option. And my understanding from the different groups that I participate in is that there is this will continue past the pandemic, that for some families, it actually works very well. And for some families there's some families, this is a law that really is all of New York State. And there are in some communities in upstate New York, to get a therapist, you might be an hour and a half away from the closest speech therapist. So it's a way to make sure that a family could get some service at least until there is the ability to get somebody in person if that's what the family wants. So teletherapy is definitely an option for families. Really important for everyone, for all families, to work with your service providers and service coordinators. And service coordination is considered a service provider, although we often think of, it's a speech therapist, a special ed teacher, but the service coordinator is also somebody who is considered a provider. Speak up. Say what's important to you. It's really important, and it will lead to a better plan and a more meaningful support. It can be a part of the sessions or whatever part you can be in. Really ask a lot of questions. that you want to learn, and also question maybe some of the techniques that you don't feel are working well with the child. Remember, it's your child, and you use your voice to make sure that you're comfortable with what's going on. It's how do you communicate? So if you are working full time and your therapist is coming when you're not home, maybe there'll be a communication book that you write your questions and that the therapist puts up answers. You might say, can we schedule a half hour every week if necessary, every 2 weeks, once a month, to have a phone conversation so we could talk in the evening about what's going on, and we could discuss things a little more detailed than we do in a communication book. It's important to communicate in whatever way works. And if you're able to, meet with the service provider, in some families, they have most of their services come during the week, but there's one Saturday that everybody's available, and that could be changed. If there's a Saturday when you can be home, that's great. Or maybe there could be a very early morning appointment once before you'd have to leave to go to work, or a later appointment where maybe you get out of work a little bit earlier, or maybe even not, and the provider could come at that time. If there's a feeding issue and you're finding, well, it'd be great if if the therapist could come during a meal time, maybe not every time, because maybe the therapist schedule doesn't work that way, but maybe there's an ability to do that. But communicating, saying what you need, what you feel is important, is really critical.
Can I just interject real quick?
Of course.
I just think that, using your voice, right? It may be easier for some parents than for others, obviously. So the service coordinator, this is a process where the service coordinator is key, because part of their role is also to empower these families, right, to do use their voices, right? Not every family is capable or has the ability to use the voice to communicate what is it that they want, or how to even go about it, right? So during the early intervention process, the service coordinator is helping that parent become empowered to use the voice, because after EI, parents are really on their own when they go on to preschool. And so to use their voice is also to help those mommies who, or even dads who don't use the voice regularly, to advocate for their child to get the services that they need, or find out what is it that works or doesn't work for the family. You also have families that may not have just one child with EI services, but may have multiple children within the home. So there's a lot of dynamics that go on during these sessions. And so helping the families be able to speak up and ask questions and ask direction is also part of and a very important element to helping, this program work for each individual family. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you, Lillian. That's a really good point. The service coordinator can be the one to help empower a family. And even some service coordinators will actually work and do a little practice with the parent who's going to, how would you tell the provider, because there's some families are so respectful of their providers, they don't want to question them. Sometimes, but the service coordinator can actually assist in helping find the language to be able to ask a question that's important, and to empower a parent
because sometimes it doesn't work. As human beings, sometimes we don't always match, right. And so it's important for that family to be able to tell their service coordinator, as much as we tried, this doesn't really work. This is not a therapist that we would like to continue working with, and so having a parent be able to say that to a service coordinator is important, because then, that service coordinator can work on finding another provider that may be a better match. So important for families to know that they're not stuck with that particular first provider that's identified, that they can always request a change.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll add at this point right here that it's really, you're want to communicate with your providers if you can. You figure that out. And as Lillian said, you can get support from your service coordinator in doing so. It's really important to make sure that you're getting the service you're supposed that is mandated on that IFSP. So if the provider's supposed to come twice a week for 30 minutes, that provider should be coming twice a week for 30 minutes, unless there's a reason you cancel. Maybe a child is sick, maybe some appointment came up, maybe the provider is sick, but you should be getting that service. And if the provider is not providing the service as per the IFSP, that's another thing. You go to your service coordinator. You can ask your service provider, but certainly go to the service coordinator and say, this therapist is not coming when she's supposed to come or when he's supposed to come. The person's either 2 hours late, or early, skipping a session. It doesn't happen often. Most of our providers are really so driven to work with families and really want to help families and really want to do what they can do. And sometimes they might be even too accommodating. You want something at 4 o'clock and they say yes, but they also have their own child who comes home at 4:45 and they look at their watch. It's not working out well. You have to express that to the service coordinator. It's important to gain that feeling of you're in control of what's going on in your family with your child. And as Lillian said, your whole family as a part of early intervention. It's a family service, and it has to take into account all aspects of your family.
I'm so sorry. I do have to leave now. It was a pleasure. Ms. Calderon has my information for any questions that I may be able to assist with.
And thank
So
you,
I leave
Lillian,
you,
for
I
being
leave
here.
you in great hands with Julie. It was a pleasure, ladies.
Thank you, Lillian.
Thank
care.
you, Lillian.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about what happens now before we go into more questions, or if there are any questions. What happens after early intervention and how that works? Early intervention is a program that is for children from birth through 3 years old. 3 years old, of course, is a kind of there isn't a specific date, of course, when your child is 3. But the way New York State works this early intervention program, a child can be in early intervention until the day before the child's 3rd birthday, unless if the child has been found eligible for preschool special education services. The early intervention services can continue beyond that birth date, depending on when it is. There are 2 times when everybody in early intervention ages out, and that's August 31st or December 31st. Any child who turns 3 from January 1st through August 31st has the ability to stay in the early intervention program through August 31st, again, provided they are found eligible for preschool special education services. Any child who was born between September 1st and December 31st can stay in early intervention through December 31st, and again, provided that the child has been found eligible for preschool special education services. And I'm emphasizing the preschool special education services because I think I'm going to stop sharing. I can see maybe who's on the screen because I only see. Okay. In order to be found eligible for preschool special education services, a child has to have had preschool special education evaluations done prior and have a meeting with the preschool special education administrator, as they're called, prior to the child's 3rd birthday. Your service coordinator will work with you to ensure that this evaluation has taken place. But as a parent, it's really important once your child is 2 years, 7 months, 8 months to start working on towards getting that evaluation process started, because there's also often a backlog in evaluations. We want to make sure that that happens so that the child can, if you can either go into preschool special education if eligible, or stay in early intervention. You would get that choice once the child is eligible. So, you know, what we find in all these years I've been doing this, as was mentioned, for many, many years, as Tatiana said, a lot of families like to choose to stay in early intervention through August 31st if they can. And reason being that a lot of preschool special education programs actually don't have a summer component. And if they had a summer component, it's 6 weeks. So that early intervention is a program that is technically 365 days a year. So there's no, I mean, people, of course, take, you know, the therapists, the teachers will take some vacation breaks and holiday breaks, but that program it just gives more time. And if a child has some significant needs and needs a preschool special education program, not only maybe speech therapy or occupational therapy, but needs to be in a program with other special education children. A lot of programs, of course, if you think of school, and that goes on a school calendar, you could get into a preschool special education program any time of the year, but there's like this beginning time, like September. So leaving August 31st and starting school program September 1st actually works for many people and children. So you would, you know, so people might choose to stay in early intervention through that period of time. You cannot be in both programs at the same time, either in early intervention or preschool special education. When preschool special education starts, early intervention ends. And families who children are born between September and December might choose to have their children leave early intervention before school starts in September, so they can be part of a program that starts in September. Families that choose to say, let's say, well, they want to stay in early intervention, but they're sending their child, maybe their child's 3 now, and that family decides it's time to go to a little preschool program, some kind of Head Start or daycare program. The therapist can then, if the schedule permits, go into those programs, even if they were going into, let's say, the home earlier. So there is a lot of flexibility in that aspect. Somebody might want to, you know, say to the therapist, oh, could you go to the school twice a week and still come to the house once a week if there was a 3 times a week schedule? And that could work. But it's really important that even though the service coordinator is responsible to keep in mind the times that evaluations need to occur, you know, as a parent, we hope you will, you know, be empowered to understand the program and to learn more and to be able to then also become a part of the, you know, of the dates, and knowing the dates and being the one to say, wait, isn't it time for my child to be evaluated? When we go through a preschool special education evaluation, they will look at when the evaluations for early intervention occurred, to make a decision if they're still relevant. Sometimes within a year, they will say not needed, not necessary to have another evaluation. Sometimes they'll want it anyway. They will look at the progress reports that the early intervention providers are required to provide, which is something we didn't discuss. The early intervention providers are required every 3 months to write a progress report that details what success has been made, what progress has been made towards the functional outcomes that are part of the IFSP, when they need to be changed, want to change those goals a little bit because the child has reached those goals, or maybe, as I said earlier, some new concerns have occurred and they want to add other functional outcomes to the child's IFSP. So that happens every 3 months. You are required to sign that note, that progress report, which means that you as a parent are definitely going to be informed as to what the provider is saying and what the provider believes. And you have an option of signing it. You have an option of signing it with stating your concerns with the report. It is the provider's, responsibility and to write the report as the provider sees the progress. But of course, you may see different things, and you have the ability to say that in writing or at the meeting. Now, the meetings occur every 6 months, the progress reports every 3 months. So that in between progress report, which we call month 3, in between month 9, actually, if you look at an IFSP as a year, which they used to do, those 2 progress reports don't generate a meeting unless somebody wants a meeting with the IOD, the early intervention official designee, and the family and the service coordinator. But but certainly at the 6-month time, there is the opportunity to do that. Have those conversations. So the preschool special education has, just like early intervention has different levels of service provision. There could be a therapist coming to the home. There could be some families actually, if they can, there are some centers that provide services like speech therapy, but even for some families, more importantly, occupational therapy or physical therapy, where there's more equipment that families certainly wouldn't have in their home. And as Lillian said, it's nice for therapists to take a child out to the playground, but that's very weather dependent and the other factors. So that a center might provide some of the equipment. There's swings sometimes inside. There are different balls to play on. So somebody might want to have a facility-based service. That's what that's called, because it's at a facility that has this equipment. Or services could be at a daycare center or early Head Start for early intervention, and also at a group developmental program that we talked about earlier. So there's the continuum of services. And in preschool special education, there is a similar continuum. And I know this was about early intervention, but I'll share a little bit, because you go from early intervention to preschool special education sometimes very quickly, right? If a child is only identified as getting early intervention services at age 2, well, age 3 comes really quickly. Maybe some of the days feel long, but the years go quickly. And the time just kind of goes by quickly. So it's good to be aware of what next would be. So next steps, and as Lillian also said, there's not a service coordinator in the preschool system. And there's somebody called a district administrator who administers the preschool special education program for families, but they have a really large caseload compared to a service coordinator's caseload, which is much smaller, and there's much more intimate in that sense. And to develop that relationship with the service coordinator than with the district administrator. So it's always good to understand the different options. So there are what's called related services, which would mean the child would get, let's say, speech therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy once a week, twice a week, depending on the child's needs, at home, at their preschool program, at their Head Start, at their daycare center. So that's just called related services. They're just services. If the child is in school, the child's in a classroom with typically developing peers and just needs a little extra support in whatever area of development. Then there is something called SEIT, Special Education Itinerant Teacher. Many people have heard of SEIT. What it means is a special education teacher is assigned to go into a child's regular mainstream classroom, a classroom where all the children are basically typically developing. Some may be getting speech therapy or OT, but they're able to go to a regular classroom with a teacher, sometimes as a teaching assistant, depending on the structure of the classroom. And this special education teacher comes into the room to work with the child in the room to really make sure that the child can fully participate in what's going on in that educational program. And And that varies as to what the child needs. Sometimes the child has a hard time sitting, let's say, in a circle time. So that SIA teacher might sit with that child and help keep that child sitting as the teacher, goes around the room and asks children to talk about their weekend or talk about some activity. What we found is that sometimes the special ed teacher actually works with the classroom teacher to try to make the experience better for the child that the special ed teacher is assigned to. So, if there's a circle, let's say there are 10 children in the room, right? And everybody brought a little object from home, a show and tell. And the teacher, how best to keep the child who may have some attention issues, who has some special needs, how to keep that child engaged. And it might be that child should be the first to speak, do the show and tell, maybe the last, or in many cases, I think it's like in the middle, so that the child has a little time to hear how other children are doing this, has to sit a little while, then gets his or her turn, and then has to sit a little longer. It depends on the child, and the SIA teacher is going to know the child very well and is going to know what might be a best way to have the teacher work with the child. So the SIA teacher is working with the child and working with anybody in the classroom to just make sure that the child gets the full benefit of that preschool program. Some SIA hours vary. Some SIAs come for an hour. Some SIAs are authorized by the city to come for 2 hours a day. It depends. That varies based on the child's needs. But that's so that is. There was the most least restrictive is just a child who's just getting, let's say, physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy. Then there's a child who needs this SIA teacher, and sometimes also will need to have another therapist in addition to the SIA teacher in that classroom. So that's the second in the continuum. And then comes what's called an integrated classroom, or a collaborative classroom, it's sometimes called. And in those cases, it's a situation where let's say there's a classroom of 12 children. 6 of those children have an IEP, and 6 of those children do not have an IEP. 6 children have no services whatsoever, and 6 children have maybe speech, maybe OT, maybe PT. They wouldn't have a SIA teacher. That's a complicated situation, but it can be explained in more detail if anybody's in that situation. But the related services could be in that classroom. Any child who has an IEP the children who have the IEP are the teacher in that room, the teacher in that, there are 2 teachers in a collaborative classroom. There's a special ed teacher and a regular ed teacher. So the children who would have technically had a SIA teacher are actually in a classroom where there are 6 children and that special ed teacher, but there are also another 6 children and a regular ed teacher, and they're all working together with that child. So that's a place where a child who has some special needs is actually interacting with typically developing children, but also getting the benefit of more intensive services. And finally, the most restrictive environment, we went from least to most, is a classroom where there are only children who have IEPs. There are schools that sometimes just have children who only have IEPs. The New York Center for Child Development is one of our schools is a school where all the children have special needs. Some are in classes of 12, some are in classes of 8. There's always 2 teaching assistants, and even some children are assigned a one-to-one aide to help transition the child if there are behavioral issues, different kind of issues. They're assigned a one-to-one in addition to the special ed teacher and the teaching assistants. So that's the most restrictive environment. So that's the continuum, and that's for the children from 3 to 5, and then the next transition in the end will be to go into the school age, school age from kindergarten through 12th grade, right? And that there are CSEs, committees of special education, to work with children at that time. We have found that a number of our children who have gone through early intervention need minimal support in preschool, and some need no support anymore by the time they get into the CSE. And there are other children who continue to need support, but are able to really benefit from the educational programs that they're placed in. I want to see if there are any questions now for anybody, or anything I didn't cover that people, that you think, Tatiana, should be covered.
Yeah, of course. So I don't see any comments on our Facebook. And if anybody's has any question, this is definitely the time to do so. But Judy, I have to say you answered most of my questions that I had prepared.
Okay.
So no problem about that. The one thing I do have a question is there any is there like a maximum of service that a person can receive in early intervention?
In theory, no. There wouldn't be a maximum because it's an individualized program. So there are children who might go to a group developmental program for, like, say, 4 hours a day, and then have 2 or 3 hours of different services at home in addition. So they're getting a lot of service in every day. Those would have to be children who really need those services, families who can support that level of service as well. But the way early intervention works, really, there should be no limit either way, right? So the minimum or the maximum. I think, for parents, I don't know exactly who's on this call, but for parents, it's important to get a sense of what's working and not working. So, you may be offered initially relatively small number of services, but if you feel, well, this is beneficial, we could use more, we need more, that's where you speak up. And it's hard. Lillian expressed that very well, right? It is hard for some families to speak up, and it is easier for others. And one of the things I've dedicated all of my many years in early intervention is speaking to the parents who don't have the ability to advocate for themselves, the parents who are much less assertive. The very assertive parents, unfortunately, in some ways, it is the way of the world, that if you push and push and push, you may get more. So you have to, I try to advocate for the families that express to me personally. They'll call and say, I really think, and I'll talk to them about ways they can do it, but I'll also intervene for those families. Some families, some of the struggle is that therapists are not going to, the travel time is to get to where somebody lives is so much more difficult. I know there's some parts of the Bronx that are really not accessible except by car or by bus. And for therapists to have to take a bus if they don't have a car, and many of our therapists don't have a car, and they don't want to really be driving a car in New York City, but it's some of these outskirt regions, even Queens, and there's some places that are very hard to get to. And those parents, that makes it more difficult, more challenging for them to get the services. So they need to be on top of it in some ways too, to make sure it's a service coordinator calling everybody that can be called. Sometimes just reminding the service coordinator that you're still waiting for that occupational therapist. They know it's on their list, but somehow things have happened. Their own child was sick. Things happen in this, so yes, that's something that people can do if they're not getting the services. So there's two issues. One is what gets authorized, mandated at the IFSP, and the other is what really actually happens and the providers that are found. So I think it's important, that parents are aware of that wherever possible. And the service coordinator will be aware of it. It's worth reminding, and just like everything, some service coordinators are they're all on top of their cases. They all have supervisors like a Lillian to remind them. But as we know, some people are going to be more on top of it than others. So the parent can contact the service coordinator. And there are other ways if the service coordinator is not doing what the service coordinator should be doing. We hope that does happen. It doesn't happen often. I'm in the position at work now where I only hear complaints. because it doesn't get to me if everything's going well. So when I think about it, I think of all the children and families we serve, and there are very few complaints. So I have to look at it that way, that basically it's positive. Sometimes I'll talk to a parent who has one small complaint. And I say, now tell me something good. Tell me something that's really nice that's happening. And then they start telling me that. They weren't telling me that initially. They just called with this problem. And when I opened it up to what's been successful, how's the good things, they have a lot to say. So that's a question I try to always remember to ask people.
That's great, Judy.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think another question I had, I know we talked about the topic of transitioning from early intervention to CPSC services. And there's the whole timeline of, I think you said about 2 years and 7 months. Is there like a specific, I guess, checklist or timeline that EI offers to parents?
There actually is, and I can, let me get that to you. I don't want to search my computer for it now, but I will get you that the transition timeline, which is what it's called.
Oh, fantastic.
And
I'll
we'll get
definitely
that to you.
forward
And if
that.
anybody wants it, that you can send it to them. It's good to
course.
keep in mind. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of it depends on the school district, but I would always say, just in general, at 2 years, 8 months, start talking about it. But I will get you the specific list.
Yes, that would be great. And I
Yeah.
could definitely forward that to anyone who's interested in, or anyone who's attended the presentation today. And then if anybody else has any other questions, you know, this is the moment to do so. If not, then this would be the conclusion of our presentation today. Judy, thank you so much. And also extend my thanks to Lillian, who was here earlier today.
I will do that.
It's been a wonderful presentation. I hope the people who were able to attend today definitely gathered the knowledge that they needed. For, you know, this is such an important topic, especially in New York City. So thank you again.
Oh, of course, my pleasure. And anybody that comes up with questions, that thinks of them later, because often it's like when you go to a doctor's office and when you walk, the minute you walk out, you have all these questions. Well, please let Tatiana know. She will contact Lillian and me, and, you know, whoever is best at answering that particular question will answer it and get back to her quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
So
know
thank you
it's a
so
big
much.
topic. There's a lot involved, and there's a lot of regulations and policies and procedures, and but it's a really good program. And I just want to say that anyone who has any concerns about their child's development or their grandchild's development, or their nephews and nieces, please don't hesitate to seek that service coordinator, to have the evaluation process. If the child's found ineligible for services, you take a deep breath and say, that's wonderful. I'm glad my child doesn't need services, but now I can relax, because I think the stress of worrying actually is an impediment to that ongoing development and family dynamic. So I really, you know, it's if any concerns, it is worth checking them out. It is available to everybody and free of cost. And I think that's what's important. It doesn't matter. This is everybody's equal in terms of their ability to access this program.
Absolutely. And for anyone who is joining us via Facebook Live, if you do have any comments, questions that we can answer later on, as Judy mentioned, you know, sometimes you forget in the moment, but you could definitely reach out to me via email, and I'll be gladly send those questions to both Lillian and Judy. Again, Judy, thank you so much. For
Thank
those
you.
that joined us, there will be a poll activated at the end. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.